I was thinking about what you said, Mary, about the allowing for the possibility to go into the academic ivory tower and write what we want and not be directed by political guidelines, political rules, political financing, whatever else. But I'm wondering what happens then when the history hits the public sphere. Because obviously it's always going to be received, even if you don't write it as a public history text, very often it's received in that way. So I'm wondering how then, if you think that you can depoliticise history by trying to take a step back, what happens then when the history is received and you end up in the political battles? Do you then say, well, let it carry on? Or do you then try and intervene and then end up somehow embroiled in the politicisation of the debates that you were trying to avoid in the first place? And I just wonder how this can work. And I mean, I know you've advocated this in relation to the GDR past, trying to depoliticise, take the politics out of it, but I just don't know how it's possible. How can you do that?
You know exactly the debates about the GDR, and you've been party to some of them, so you know exactly the scene we're talking about. One thing that I repeatedly have to say, and I find it just extraordinary that this isn't generally understood, why is it that an Ian Kershaw can write about popular support for Hitler and charisma and the popular support for the Third Reich and not be accused of being a closet Nazi sympathiser, whereas I cannot write about normalisation in the GDR and modes of accommodation with a dictatorial regime and not be accused of being a closet communist sympathiser. And I think it's illegitimate for reviewers to say that my interpretation of the GDR is sort of disguised politics and not academic work. I think we have to be very clear that what we're doing when we sweat away in dreadful archives and we sit forever in Lichterfelder West and, think, why am I going to get a lousy coffee out of this horrible machine in a plastic cup, in the interest of the greater glory of science, that we then get accused of doing this for political purposes because we want to say the GDR wasn't as bad as everybody says. No, I mean, we're actually following an academic agenda, and I think it's important to say, if you're trying to understand the conditions for stability for dictatorships, and one of those conditions is modes of accommodation with regime, so you can try to live what you consider to be a perfectly ordinary life as many people constructed it, and bracketing out repression, power, the wall, the Stasi, and that you find evidence that this is the way people lived their lives, and that in itself was one of the many factors which allowed the SED to stay in power for so long, leaving aside all the obvious ones like Moscow, the wall, the Stasi, which everybody knows about. If you do that work, you're not doing it for political reasons. So I think it's important to say that academic history is different from history driven by political interests, and it's ridiculous when you are the target of critiques that suggest that you've only written what you've written because it is politicised. I think it's very, very important to make it quite clear when you are personally engaged in what you're writing about. I've just got a book in press coming out this autumn where I'm dreadfully personally engaged, and make it quite clear, and I fly off into a rage of my own in the conclusion, and my emotions are all over the page and splattered about, and I'm in debate with the son of a Nazi who doesn't like what I've written about his parents, not surprisingly, and so our debate is splattered across the footnotes. That's a different kind of history. I don't ever want to write that kind of book again, but I did, and that is the kind of engaged history that I am only too acutely aware of at the moment, as how different it is from the normal kind of history I write. So I think there are differences, and I think we can be aware of the differences. I think if historical books make a difference to public debates, that's very good. I think it's important that people know just how extensive the Stasi was. When they didn't realise it before 1989. People were surprised. They hadn't realised. I think it's important that historians can say there's a distinction between the structural presence of the Stasi and its actual extent on the one hand, and people's consciousness and awareness of it and the impact on their everyday lives on the other hand, and say subjectivities are not the same as structural realities, and the historian can actually analyse these in a way that people themselves, so if that makes a difference to people's awareness, that's interesting and that's good.
But on the other hand, we have followed the public interest of the Stasi syndrome. We have all written about the Stasi, and most of us have not written about the party itself. The public was interested because it's a moral item. You can speak about treason, and you can say that the subject, the IM, is a moral, is no moral subject, and that's why you can discuss them very easily in public debates. But thank you. It's far more complicated with the functionary of the parties, the local functionaries and the regional functionaries, and of course even the professional debate normally has not engaged in the question of the SED of the party instead of the Stasi problem, which has been a public problem. Even in this case, academic history has not get rid of the rules of public debate and public attention, public interest.
It cannot be different. I mean, cannot be. There's no other solution. I mean, how distant in terms of time does a past have to be analyzed by us as historians in a depoliticized way and be perceived in a depoliticized way? I mean, it's 20 years now since the end of the GDR, but of course the GDR is still very much with us. There are 17 million East Germans still being part of a distinct part of our German society. So the distance is quite different than, for example, the distance of National Socialism. I mean, it's 70, 80 years now. It makes a difference. I mean, with regards to Nazism, the Third Reich, there is an overlapping, very broad consensus. A depoliticizing consensus, if you want. We do not yet have this, and we probably cannot have this kind of consensus with regards to the GDR, with regards to the SED, the Stasi system, and so on, and so forth. And this, of course, these debates are political debates, and it cannot be different.
And the distance is not a temporal one, it's a cultural one. It's
a temporal and a cultural one. It's a cultural one because it is a temporal one. It's only 20 years.
If you speak about the generations, but the difference between 1945 and 1989 is that the caesura of 45 is not disputed in the German public, whereas the caesura of 89 is disputed. And we have different milieus and different cultures, and that's why the term normalization, which normally is not be used for the National Socialist time period, refers to a milieu of the former PDS and the leftists, which understand normalization as continuity or the idea of a continuity. And that's why these debates are so very lively and part more of moral education instead of academic historiography. And we have to answer to these questions, but with our ideas referring to the everyday life and saying, I have to discuss with Stefan Wolle the next week again in Bautzen about the everyday life, and I know already the audience, the public, it will not be so smooth as it is here today, but we have to refer to the concept and to the analytical power of this everyday life concept, and we do so.